One table setting didn't belong, and someone knew why. Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Ombra. Share where you're listening from in the comments. I love seeing this community gather. Your presence makes each mystery feel special. Let's begin. If you've never watched a 280-pound genius eat lunch like it's a religious observance, you've missed one of the quieter wonders of New York City. At 1:15 that Wednesday, Nero Wolfe was on the third forkful of braised veal breast with porcini and a sauce that Fritz had been humming over since 10 that morning. You don't hum over sauce unless it has wine, cream, and your soul in it. Wolfe was giving it the attention that most men reserve for a first love or a last cigarette. I was at my usual spot at the dining table, to his right, facing the window in the backyard, where the snow was trying to remember it was December. The table was set for 3 as usual, Wolfe at the head, me on his right, Fritz on his left. Wolfe doesn't like surprises in his food or his seating chart. He says it disturbs the digestion, which for him is about a notch below the Bill of Rights and 1 notch above the 10 Commandments. So when the doorbell rang at 1:18, the clock on the wall has opinions, I knew 2 things. Wolfe wouldn't like it. I'd be the one dealing with it. Wolfe made a sound like a baritone thundercloud. His lips compressed just enough to prove he had them. "Confound it," he muttered. Fritz. Fritz Brenner, who would have apologized to a soufflé for collapsing, set his fork down as gently as if it were nitroglycerin. "I will go, sir," he said. Wolfe grunted, the noise he uses when he knows perfectly well that I'm going instead. It was his way of registering a protest with the universe in general. "Sit," I told Fritz, pushing my chair back. "You made the veal. I'll fight off the barbarian at the gate." Wolfe didn't look at me. He forked up another piece of veal breast and held it near his mouth, as if hoping the bell was a one-time mistake that would go away if he ignored it. It rang again, a little longer. "Archie," he said. "Yes, sir." I'm already heroically in motion. In the hall, I checked the mirror, because nothing cripples authority like a smear of sauce at the corner of the mouth. Then I went to the front door, flipped the chain, and opened it. The barbarian turned out to be female, short and furious, not at me or the bell, but at life in general. She was mid-30s, with dark hair twisted into something that was supposed to look careless and failed. Her coat was one of those expensive grey numbers that tries to be both casual and well-bred and succeeds on the price tag only. In one hand, she clutched a flat leather portfolio like it was a weapon. In the other, she had a pair of gloves she'd obviously forgotten to put on. "Are you Archie Goodwin?" she demanded. "That's right," I said. "And you're interrupting a sacred—" "Right." She blinked. "What?" "Lunch. Wolfe's, to be exact. It's like mass, except the wine goes in the pan first. What's the emergency?" She bit down hard on the word emergency, as if deciding whether to keep it. "I need to see Nero Wolfe. Right now." I've seen people in all shades of upset, from pale and fluttery to red and hysterical. She wasn't either. She was tight, wound like a watch about to snap its spring. Her jaw was set and her eyes, gray or maybe blue, depending on the light, were too bright in a way I didn't like. I gave her the once-over and a half. No smell of liquor, no smudged makeup, no stagger. If she was crazy, it was the kind that wears heels and keeps appointments. "Lady," I told her, "Nero Wolfe doesn't see anybody during lunch. There are nations that get more flexibility in their treaties. Come back at 3 or phone and ask for an appointment." Her hand tightened on the portfolio. "This can't wait." "That," I said politely, "is what they all say. Fires, betrayals, lovers, embezzlers, the Yankees batting lineup. It all can't wait. Wolfe, however, can, and does. Who are you?" She hesitated, and something in her tightened further. "My name is Cora Stenwick." That rang a faint bell, but not enough to sound the alarm. I studied her. It means nothing to me, but I'm a cultural barbarian. Should it? Her lips curved in a humorless half-smile. If you ever read restaurant reviews, it might. That nudged it. Stenwick, I repeated, as in Adrian Stenwick, the food critic, the guy who can make or break a place with 3 adjectives and a metaphor about foam. Culinary columnist, she corrected automatically. He hates the word critic. And yes, he's my father. Out of habit, my eyes flicked past her, checking for paparazzi, trailing husbands or tail cars. The street was its usual self. A couple of cabs, a delivery truck, and a guy walking a dog who looked like the dog had the brains in the partnership. "All right, Miss Stenwick," I said. "You are officially on the sidewalk of possibility. What do you want with Wolfe?" She drew in a breath through her nose. "Someone is trying to destroy my father." "That's fashionable these days," I said. "Take a number." "Not in the way you mean." Her voice sharpened. "He's being set up. Framed. I don't know by whom or why, but I know it's happening. And I was told that if anyone could untangle it, it's Nero Wolfe." That last sentence had a familiar ring. For years, New York has been a word-of-mouth ad campaign for the lazy, brilliant, and expensive detective at West 35th Street. Normally, that's good for business. At 1:20 p.m., it's bad for digestion. "Who told you that?" I asked. She hesitated again. "Chef Domingo Velasquez," she said finally. "From Domingo's table?" I know my way around New York, especially where the food can be put on the company expense account. Domingo's Table is one of those places where you have to book 6 weeks ahead unless, like a certain 280-pound orchid fancier I could name, you are a force of nature. I've taken more than 1 crumb of information off their linen. "That's a respectable recommendation," I admitted, "but it doesn't get you past the timetable." Her mouth pressed together. She glanced at the street, then back at me. "Mr. Goodwin, if I leave here without at least speaking to him, my father will go into print tomorrow and tear apart a restaurant that doesn't deserve it." "More than that." She faltered, and that brightness in her eyes tipped towards something wetter. "It will ruin someone, a chef, his staff, the whole place. It will look like a vicious, unprovoked attack, and it won't be his fault." "Your father's not responsible for what he writes?" I asked. "That's a new ethical standard." "You don't understand," she snapped. "He's been fed lies. Someone has planted evidence, manipulated him, I don't know. He thinks he's exposing fraud. He isn't. And whoever's behind it," she swallowed, "they're using his name to destroy people, and if he finds out afterward that he's been used like that, it will kill him. Not literally," she added, a little too quickly, "but professionally, personally." The street was cold. The wind got under my collar and sent a draft down my spine, but that wasn't all it was. "Why us?" I asked. "Why Wolfe?" She looked at me like the question was stupid. "Because he never leaves his house and solves things anyway. Because he cares about food. Because Domingo said that if there's one man who might give a damn about a table being rigged, it's Nero Wolfe." A table being rigged. The phrase hung there, echoing. I leaned against the door jamb. "Is this about a bad review? Because I should warn you, we charge the same for rescuing reputations as for rescuing lives. Sometimes more." "It's not a bad review yet," she said. "That's the problem. The column goes to press tonight. I don't have time to stop it through the paper." "I tried." She laughed sharply. "Do you know how many people stand in line to tell an editor that a critic is wrong? They patted my head and told me Adrian Stenwick has integrity." "Does he?" "Yes," she said, with the kind of flat certainty you don't buy at a store. "And someone is exploiting that." That, I had to admit, was a new one. Most of the exploitation we saw was of the other kind. The dining room door opened behind me. Fritz's voice, tentative. "Mr. Goodwin, Mr. Wolfe wishes to know whether the intruder is a gas company man, a politician, or a lunatic. He says those are the only categories that justify 2 rings. I turned my head. None of the above, I said. It's the daughter of Adrian Stenwick. She has a problem involving a restaurant, and a frame-up, and a deadline. The column goes to press tonight. There was a pause. You can hear a pause if you've lived with Nero Wolfe long enough. It's heavier than silence. From the dining room his voice came, amplified by annoyance. Archie, bring her in. Cora stiffened a little. I don't want to intrude on... That's the point, I said. You already have. Come on. I ushered her inside, shut the door, and hung up her coat. Under it, she had on a navy dress with a neckline that tried to be businesslike and didn't entirely succeed. She wasn't using it, though. Her attention was ahead, toward the dining room and what waited there. Wolfe was at his place when we entered, with his napkin on his chest and his eyes narrowed at the intruder. He didn't get up. The day Wolfe rises for a client at lunch, I'll check the weather in hell. Miss Cora Stenwick, I announced. She stopped 3 feet from the table and stared at him like he was a painting she'd seen in a magazine and wasn't sure she liked in person. That happens. Wolfe lifted his brows a millimeter. You understand, he said, that you are here on sufferance. It is lunchtime. Customary hours for business are from 11 to 12 and from 4 to 6. Weekdays. His voice was the familiar blend of molasses and gravel. Outside of a courtroom, I've never seen it fail to slow somebody down. Yes, Mr. Wolfe, she said. I wouldn't have come if it weren't urgent. Obviously. He looked at his plate with tragic reproach and then back at her. You say your father is being used as an instrument of sabotage? Yes. Sit. He waved a hand in the general direction of the empty chair at the sideboard, not at the table. You may speak while I eat, but you will be concise. I will not sacrifice veal breast to prolixity. I pulled a chair up for her where he indicated. Fritz, looking worried about the violation of liturgy, refilled Wolfe's glass and withdrew. I leaned on the doorway between her and the kitchen where I could watch both. Begin with your father, Wolfe said. He is a glutton, but not in the vulgar sense. He devours experience, reputation, influence. Yet he is known to be scrupulous in his judgments. How then could he be deceived? Her chin came up. My father is not a glutton. He lives by eating in public and pronouncing upon it, Wolfe said. For money, that qualifies. I put in, he means it in the nicest possible way, Miss Stenwick. Don't mind the vocabulary. He talks like that to everyone. She drew a breath. My father has strict rules about reviews. He pays his own way. He never accepts free meals. He never reviews a restaurant where he has any personal connection. And he never writes from someone else's impressions. He goes himself, always. Commendable, Wolfe murmured, buttering a piece of bread. And, last week, she said, he received an anonymous envelope at his office. It contained a typed letter and a reservation confirmation for a new tasting menu at a place called Maison Lutece. Wolfe's eyes flicked to me. He didn't need to ask. He knew I knew. I nodded. Opened last month on East 63rd, I supplied. Small, high concept, prick fix, French with a lot of hyphens. The chef's a young guy from Lyon who worked under Domingo for a while. Yes, she said, Chef Luc Morel. The letter claimed that Maison Lutece was a fraud. That much of the food was bought pre-cooked and plated for show. That their famous truffle consommé was actually powdered base doctored with Madeira. That Luc is a pretty boy with knives whose technique is smoke and mirrors. People in your father's line, Wolfe said, attract poison pen letters the way meat attracts flies. Why did he attend to this one? Because it included details, she said quickly. Specifics about the dishes, about the suppliers, about the plating. Things that sounded inside end, she added reluctantly, because it said that if he didn't expose this, someone else would, and that he'd be shown up as either a coward or a fool. Ah, Wolfe said. His pride. Go on? He made a reservation under a false name and went Wednesday night. When he came home, he was livid. He said it was the most shameless charade he'd ever seen. He said he'd caught them in 3 different deceptions in the first hour. Specifics, Wolfe said curtly. She nodded. He said the scallop course had been seared in advance and reheated, not cooked to order. That the wine pairing they claimed was a small batch Sancerre was actually a generic Loire Sauvignon. That the hazelnut praline in the dessert was commercial paste, not house-made. Wolfe's eyes half closed. When he thinks about food malpractice, it's personal. I presume, he said, that he verified these impressions. He is not wholly incompetent. He did, she said. The next day he called the importer listed on the wine and asked whether they supplied Maison Lutece. They said no. He had a friend in a pastry kitchen taste a sample of the praline he brought back. She swore it was out of a jar. He even spoke to one of the waiters from that night, someone who recognized him and came to him privately afterward. And the man confirmed everything. Said Luke was a showman, that the kitchen cut corners, that... She broke off, and her hands clenched in her lap. My father told me all this. He was furious, not just because they were cheating, but because they were doing it cynically, trading on his name, using his presence that night to give themselves credibility with other diners. And he decided, Wolfe said, to wield his thunderbolt. Yes, he wrote the column. It goes to press tonight. I haven't read it, but I know my father. He'll destroy Luc Morel. It won't just be about the food. It will be about character, integrity, fraud. It will carry weight. Granted, Wolfe said. But if the restaurant is indeed dishonest, she shook her head hard. They're not. That's the point. I know Luc. Wolfe's brows rose again, this time higher. In what capacity? Heat touched her cheeks. I was involved with him, briefly. We ended it 3 months ago, amicably. And no, my father doesn't know. He would never have agreed to review the place if he did. Convenient, Wolfe murmured. It's not... She bit back whatever she'd been about to say. I went to see Luc yesterday. I told him about the anonymous letter, about the column. He was shocked, hurt, furious. He swore he would never do what my father is accusing him of. He walked me through his kitchen, showed me his suppliers, his storage, the wine, the praline, all of it checked out. He even called in his staff and made them look me in the eye. I watched Wolfe as she talked. His fork slowed, then stopped. That's the Nero Wolfe equivalent of a drum roll. And the waiter, he asked, the one who privately corroborated your father's impressions. Cora's hands twisted together. Luc said the description matched one of his servers, Marco, but Marco denied it. He said he never spoke to my father, that he never would. He's loyal to Luc, almost to a fault. It's not in character for him to sneak around and whisper in critics' ears. So someone, Wolfe said, impersonated him. To your father, or your father is lying, or Luc is, or you. She flushed. I'm not lying. I don't know that, Wolfe said. I know nothing. That is why you are here, prosing on at my table, sabotaging my digestion. I cut in. If you want her to be concise, you might consider not interrupting her with insults. He spared me a glare. Bah, Miss Stenwick, proceed. You say your father has been misled into preparing a devastating review of a restaurant you believe to be innocent. On what basis, other than your charming recollection of an affair, do you conclude that it is innocent? Her eyes flashed. Because I went there last night, alone, under another name. I ate the full tasting menu, watched the kitchen, talked to other diners. There were no shortcuts, no reheated scallops, no fake wine. The food was impeccable, and the waiter who talked to my father never left the room. Perhaps, Wolfe said, they recognized you and staged a performance. It's possible, she admitted. But there are limits. You can fake a smile. You can't fake 30 covers at once without any cracks. And there's something else. She reached for the portfolio, flipped it open, and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. She laid it on the sideboard, within Wolfe's reach. "I went to my father's office this morning," she said. "He wasn't there yet. His assistant stepped away to take a call. I know where he keeps his drafts. I'm not proud of it, but I took a risk." "You stole from him," Wolfe translated. "I borrowed," she said tightly, "long enough to make a copy." Wolfe's eyes had sharpened. He wiped his fingers, pushed his plate an inch away, and crooked a finger at me. "Archie, bring it." I took the paper and handed it to him. His thick fingers unfolded it, holding it with the delicacy he generally reserves for truffles and orchids. His eyes went left to right, line by line. The set of his mouth changed, not much, but enough for someone who knows it as well as I do. "This," he said at last, "is vitriolic. Even for him." "It's not him," Cora said quietly. "Not really. My father can be harsh, but this is poisonous, personal. There are phrases in there he would never use, sentences that don't sound like him at all. He must have dictated part of it to someone or had help or—" "Bah," Wolfe said. "You are rationalizing. One's children are always astonished to discover that their parents are human." He patted the paper with his fingertips. "Nonetheless, the language is off, Archie." "Yeah. I'd been reading over his shoulder when I could snatch a line. Doesn't read like the stuff I've seen under Adrian Stenwick's name. He usually goes for cool surgical slices. This is more meat cleaver." "Exactly." She leaned forward. "I think someone tampered with it. Swapped pages, inserted paragraphs. Maybe through his assistant, maybe through the paper system. I don't know. All I know is, if this runs, it will destroy Luke. It will kill my father's credibility. And someone will have achieved exactly what they wanted. A table turned over, lives smashed, and my father as the executioner of their grudge." The room was quiet for a few seconds. The only sound was the clock and the faint humming from the kitchen where Fritz was trying to pretend he wasn't listening. Wolfe slid the paper back onto the sideboard and regarded her. "You said Domingo Velasquez sent you here?" "Yes." "In what terms?" "He said," she said slowly, "that if anyone would be offended by a table being set for one too many, it would be you." I didn't understand what he meant. I thought it was one of his chef metaphors. Wolfe's eyes half closed. He loves a good phrase almost as much as a good sauce. "A table set for one too many," he repeated. "Yes, that is apt." He frowned at his plate as if it had personally conspired in this. Then he took his napkin from his chest, folded it with his usual care, and placed it beside the plate. That, for Nero Wolfe, is the equivalent of jumping on a horse and galloping into battle. "Your father," he said, "has enemies." "Yes. So does this Luke Morel, presumably. So does Domingo. So, for that matter, do you. We have a critic, a chef, and a daughter, all entangled in a matter that touches food, pride, and reputation. Someone is indeed setting a table. For whom and with what remains to be seen." He turned his head toward me. "Archie." "Present," I said. "Phone Mr. Velasquez at Domingo's table. Tell him I will speak with him at 4 o'clock here. Also, obtain the last 6 months of Adrian Stenwick's columns. I wish to examine his style, and call Long Cohen at the Gazette and ascertain the precise time at which tomorrow's edition closes the food pages." "Check, check, and check," I said. That sounds suspiciously like taking a case. Cora's shoulders sagged a little, as if some tightly wound spring inside had let out half a turn. "Does that mean you'll help?" Wolfe regarded her. "I have not yet consented to embroil myself," he said coldly. "I have merely consented to investigate whether the situation is sufficiently offensive to my sense of order to justify the inconvenience. You will leave the draft of your father's column with me." She nodded quickly. Of course. You will also, he added, prepare a written account of your involvement with Chef Morel, including dates, locations, and the reasons for its termination. I do not care to have a client's personal entanglements erupt midway through my work. Her flush deepened. Is that necessary? Entirely, he said. I will not be made an instrument in an amorous contretemps. If your motive is merely to preserve the honor of a discarded lover, I prefer to know it in advance. She stared at him for a moment. Then she laughed once, sharply, without much humor. You don't make this easy, Mr. Wolfe. On the contrary, he said, I make it precise. Archie will give you paper in the office. You will write now while the facts are fresh and while I still remember why I permitted this interruption. She rose, clutching her portfolio, and looked at me. I gestured toward the door. Come along, I said. The confessional is this way. We don't have stained glass, but the chair is comfortable. As we left, I glanced back at Wolfe. He was gazing at his plate like a man whose feast had been stolen 3 bites in, but his eyes had that certain glint, the one that means some part of his brain, the part that never stops working even when the rest of him is sulking, had already sat up, licked its chops, and taken an interest. He hadn't said yes yet. Nero Wolfe is stingy with his yeses. But for a man who likes his table exactly set, a table set for one too many is an insult, and Nero Wolfe does not let insults to his appetite go unanswered. I guided Cora into the office, flicked on the desk lamp, and handed her a pad and pen. She sat with the posture of someone trying to balance urgency and embarrassment on the same narrow shelf. While she bent over the pad, tapping the pen like she wanted it to explain her life to her, I leaned against the wall and watched the snow outside shift from lazy flakes to a more motivated descent. New York likes to add atmospheric pressure when something messy is brewing. Cora wrote quickly at first, then slowed, then started over on a fresh sheet. Personal history is tricky business, especially when you're writing it for a man who can smell a lie like Fritz can smell a burned roux. When she finally put the pen down, she exhaled hard, folded the pages, and handed them to me. This is everything, she said. We'll see, I said, not unkindly. Wolfe has a different definition of everything than most humans. She managed a small, humorless smile. I'm learning. I took the pages and didn't read them just then. I slipped them into a fresh envelope, sealed it, and wrote her name on the front. Wolfe likes documentation handled like evidence at a federal trial. After a moment she stood, smoothing her dress. What now? She asked. Now, I said, you go home and keep your head down. If someone's rigging the table, as your pal Domingo put it, there's no reason to assume they're done. And if they know you're tugging at the tablecloth, they may notice. The look she gave me said she didn't like the idea of going home and being still. Not surprising. People come to Wolfe because they want movement. They forget he moves by not moving at all. She hesitated. Will he take the case? He won't say so until he knows he will, and maybe not even then. But if you ruined his lunch, you've earned at least an inquiry. That's more than most. She left with a nod and a grateful look that stuck in the air a little longer than the draft from the front door. When I came back to the dining room, Wolfe was still in his chair, the remains of the veal breast looking like a crime scene he couldn't quite bring himself to examine further. He didn't look up when I entered. She is overwrought, he said. That's customary in people who think their world is collapsing. Pfui, a world does not collapse because of a newspaper column. I sat. Maybe not yours. Hers might. Wolfe grunted, which is his way of acknowledging a point he doesn't want to dignify with agreement. He pushed the plate away another inch, a sign that the interruption had done permanent damage. Her account of Luc Morel, did she appear sincere? About as sincere as a person gets when she'd rather not be talking about it at all. I didn't skim her written confession. Figured you'd want first sip. But she's not lying to herself, at least. Whether she's lying to us is another matter. Indeed, he placed his fingertips together. But lies of omission are the more dangerous, particularly where affection is involved. That is why I required her statement. We cannot proceed with a client's heart dangling like a snare on the path. Speaking of proceeding, I said, does this count as a case? No, Wolfe said sharply. It counts as a disturbance. Whether it repends into a case depends entirely upon whether Domingo Velasquez corroborates or complicates the matter, and on whether Adrian Stenwick has indeed been tampered with, or whether he is merely succumbing to the temptation to play God with his fork. All right, I'll call Velasquez. And Cohen, Wolfe reminded me. It is essential we know the paper's schedule with precision. I made the calls from the office. Cohen, who's always glad to hear from me unless Wolfe's involved, confirmed that the food section locked at 8 sharp. No wiggle room. That meant we had barely 7 hours before Stenwick's culinary vendetta rolled onto the presses and into the laps of all the innocent brunchers of Manhattan. Velasquez, on the other hand, sounded less like a chef and more like a man peering over his shoulder in a dark alley. He agreed to come at 4, though his voice suggested he'd rather be blanching rattlesnakes. When I returned with the information, Wolfe had abandoned the table and settled into his office chair like a storm cloud settling onto a mountain peak. The draft of Stenwick's review lay before him, weighted on one corner by the gold paper knife he pretends not to prize. Cohen says 8, I reported. Velasquez is coming at 4. Good. Wolfe tapped the paper with a single thick finger. This document is irregular. The syntax is erratic. The metaphors are excessive. Even the vitriol lacks his usual precision. Someone meddled. Or he wrote it in a temper. No. Wolfe closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them with unmistakable certainty. Stenwick's fury is cold, surgical. This is hot, bludgeoning. He exhaled, displeased. Someone has indeed set a table for one too many, which, coming from Nero Wolfe, was tantamount to blowing a horn at the starting line. So, I said, leaning against the desk, what do we do until 4? Wolfe's eyes went to the envelope containing Cora's written statement. We read, we analyze, and then... He paused, as if lowering himself into a decision he'd hoped to avoid. You, Archie, will go to Maison Lutèce. I straightened. Tonight? Now. Well, I can't very well get a tasting menu at 2:30 in the afternoon. You can get what you need, he said. Speak to Luc Morel. Examine the kitchen. Gauge the staff. Observe their reactions when you mention Stenwick's forthcoming review. So you've decided we're involved? I've decided, Wolfe said, that someone is tampering with a critic's voice, weaponizing a chef's livelihood, and disturbing my lunch. That is quite enough. It was as official as it was going to get. I grabbed my coat. As I closed the office door behind me, Wolfe called out, Archie. Yeah. Be observant and be wary. The trail has already been laid. It is the hands that laid it we must uncover. Which was Wolfe speak for. Someone is playing a game. Don't let them play it better than you. I stepped out into the cold afternoon with Wolfe's instructions replaying in my head, mostly because when Wolfe tells you to be observant and wary, what he really means is, if you miss something, Archie, I will make you listen to my disappointment for days. That's a fate worse than gunfire. The cab ride to Maison Lutèce was uneventful, except for a driver who hummed through his nose like a kazoo with ambition. The restaurant sat on a quiet block near East 63rd, the kind of street that pretends New York is a cultured, leisurely city instead of a boiling pot of impatience. The windows were tall, with curtains drawn just enough to hint at mystery, which is a good trick for a place trying to build its legend before it builds a second bathroom. Inside, the dining room was empty, except for a hostess who had the poise of someone trained to greet royalty and bill them for water. We did a short waltz where I pretended to have a reservation, and she pretended to believe I'd lost it, until I dropped Luc Morel's name. That thawed the air a few degrees. She led me past the dining room to the kitchen entrance, where the real world begins. Kitchens aren't romantic. They're hot, loud, and full of people moving quickly with sharp objects. But this one was quiet. Afternoon prep time, with a few cooks working like they had the confidence of knowing exactly where everything belonged. Luc Morel spotted me the moment I stepped inside. He was tall and lean, with the kind of face that makes people underestimate the steel behind it. His dark hair was pulled back, and he wiped his hands on his apron as he approached. His eyes were sharp, a shade too alert. "You're Archie Goodwin," he said, in a French accent that sounded borrowed from a movie where everyone smokes and suspects everyone else. "That's right. You work for Nero Wolfe." "That's also right. And I'll save you time. We are not here to destroy you, sabotage you, or drive your restaurant into the Hudson. Miss Stenwick came to us." A muscle in his jaw twitched. Good. It meant he wasn't rehearsed for this. "Cora," he murmured. I hoped she would not. She's too impulsive. "In my experience, impulsive people are good for our business," I said. "They get scared without waiting for the situation to become terminal." His shoulders eased by a hair. "Come," he said. "If you must inspect, inspect." I followed him deeper inside, watching everything. The kitchen was tidy, ingredients labeled, surfaces clean, staff moving with the rhythm of experience, not panic. No sign of shortcuts, no jars of commercial praline lurking in shame. A sous chef was carefully trimming artichokes like they had personally insulted him. "You know what Stenwick wrote?" I asked casually. Luc stopped. "Not in detail. Only what Cora told me." "So you haven't seen the draft?" "No. Want to." His jaw tightened. Again. "If it is as bad as she fears, perhaps no." I studied him. "You're remarkably calm for a man who might get eviscerated in print tomorrow." He gave a short laugh. "I'm not calm, Mr. Goodwin. I'm furious, insulted, and, how do you say, deeply, deeply annoyed. But I cannot show it to my staff. My job is to keep the ship steady. Panic is contagious." "So is guilt," I said. His eyes snapped to mine. For a moment, the temperature dropped. "If I were guilty," he said quietly, "I would not have let you back here, or shown Cora anything. You think I'm a fool?" "No," I said. "If I thought you were a fool, I wouldn't be here. Wolfe doesn't bother with fools unless they're paying." He breathed out, the edge softening. "Then what do you want?" "Information," I said. "First the waiter. Marco, the one Stenwick claims spoke to him privately. Where is he?" "He is off today. Family matter." "Convenient." Luc bristled. "He's loyal. I would trust him with my life." "Would you trust him with your reputation?" Luc hesitated just long enough to be interesting. "Yes," he said finally, but there was a crack in the conviction. "Second question," I said. "Anyone on your staff have an axe to grind? With you? With Marco? With the restaurant? Anyone who might want to see you knock down a peg?" He gave a humorless smile. "Mr. Goodwin, we are in the restaurant business. Everyone has an axe to grind, but no one here would sabotage me. They know the restaurant lives or dies on unity. Unity is nice. Sabotage is simpler." He didn't answer, which was an answer. I drifted to the prep counter and lifted a lid on a stock pot. Real veal bones, slow roasted. A consommé simmering patiently, the old-fashioned way. I could almost hear Wolfe grumble approvingly. "This is all very wholesome," I said. "No powdered shortcuts, no deception. Almost makes me wonder if Stenwick imagined it." "He did not imagine," Luc said bitterly. "Someone planted lies in his path. I know Cora believes it was not him, and I want to believe her, but if he wrote what she fears, you think he did it deliberately." Luc's silence was sharp enough to cut through the steam. "I think," he said at last, "that critics enjoy power. Some more than others, and some do not need lies to justify using it. You're saying he's arrogant. I'm saying, Luke said slowly, that a man like Adrian Stenwick does not need a reason to tear down someone like me. He needs a motive. Big difference. And what would the motive be? He looked at me then, really looked, weighing the risk of the answer. Cora, he said quietly. I didn't blink. You think Stenwick is jealous? No, worse. Luke's voice went low. I think he is protective, and I think he believes I hurt her. Did you? No, he said firmly. We ended things because our work lives collided. She was traveling for her father. I was building this place. There was no room. But if he found out... He let it hang. Or, he added, someone wants him to think he found out. That was more like it. A nudge. A planted truth. A powder keg with a match taped to it. I turned toward the door. Wolfe's meeting Domingo at 4. If you want to avoid getting roasted tomorrow, you'd better be ready to talk. Luke's brows lifted. You want me to go to him? No, I said. Trust me. You don't want to. Wolfe doesn't leave home for the police commissioner, so unless you can cook him a truffle omelette through telepathy, you're not coming to the brownstone. Just stay reachable. He nodded, though he looked like he'd rather face a kitchen fire. As I stepped back onto the street, the snow had thickened. Good weather for trouble. And from where I stood, the pot was just beginning to simmer. Wolfe was waiting, Domingo was coming, and somewhere between a critic, a chef, and a daughter with a ticking deadline, somebody had salted the pot with lies. My job was to find whose hand shook the shaker. By the time I made it back to the brownstone, my ears were red, my collar was snow-damp, and my brain felt like it had been marinated in suspicion for an hour, slightly tenderized, but nowhere near cooked. Inside, the warmth wrapped around me like Fritz had temporarily installed central heating in my soul. I hung up my coat and headed straight for the office, brushing off the snow as I went. Wolfe was in his chair, the draft of Stenwick's review balanced on his knee, reading it with the expression of someone evaluating a poorly tuned violin. His lips were pursed just enough to say that the world was failing him, sentence by sentence. You're early, he said without looking up. I hate to break it to you, but time moved forward while you were communing with Stenwick's adjectives. It's almost 3, he snorted. Your flippancy grows tedious. That's my charm. Want my report? His eyes lifted a fraction. If it is not frivolous. It's not dessert, but it has texture. I sat down and gave him the rundown. Luke's reaction, the kitchen inspection, the staff dynamic, Marco's mysterious day off, and Luke's theory that Stenwick might be acting on paternal fury or someone else's manipulation. When I finished, Wolfe closed the draft and leaned back with a ponderous, controlled inhale. Luke Morrell is angry, he said, but not fearful. That suggests either innocence or foolishness. He didn't strike me as stupid. No, Wolfe agreed, but intelligence does not preclude self-deception. He tapped the edge of the paper. And if someone truly impersonated a waiter, that indicates a scheme of considerable subtlety. One does not contrive such a deception for mere mischief. So someone wants Luke's place ruined, or Stenwick's reputation damaged, Wolfe countered, or both. Motives often play leapfrog. I was about to press him when the doorbell rang. Fritz, quick on his feet for a man who treats rugs like sacred relics, hurried down the hall. A moment later, Domingo Velasquez entered the office. I'd seen him around the restaurant world. Broad-shouldered, silver-streaked hair, a chef's presence that filled the air like the smell of garlic in a hot pan. Today, though, he carried a tension in his posture that no marinade could soften. Mr. Wolfe, he said with a respectful nod. Goodwin. Sit, Mr. Velasquez, Wolfe instructed, gesturing toward the red leather chair. I understand you urged Miss Stenwick to consult me. Domingo sat heavily. I did, and I'm grateful she listened. That remains to be seen, Wolfe replied. Explain your involvement. Domingo rubbed a hand across his face. I've known Adrian Stenwick for 20 years. He's harsh, but he's fair. When he condemns a kitchen, it's because it deserves it. But this business with Maison Lutèce, I smelled rot the moment Cora mentioned that anonymous letter. You read it? I asked. He showed me a copy. Typed. No signature. No return address. But the details inside, too exact, too neatly packaged. The sort of information you'd only know if you'd worked the line. So a disgruntled ex-employee, I suggested. Possibly, Domingo said. But then I thought of Luke. I trained him. He was ambitious, yes, and he had an ego, but he wasn't a cheat. He left my kitchen because he wanted freedom. I respected that. So when Cora came to me saying her father believed Luke was running a charade, I knew something was wrong. Wolfe's brows knit. Your first instinct was not to question Luke's integrity? Domingo straightened. If you'd watched a man sweat over a sauce at 3 a.m. until it was perfect, you'd have the same instinct. And yet someone has taken pains to create the illusion of fraud, Wolfe said. For what purpose? I don't know, Domingo admitted. But I can guess who might benefit. He paused, weighing his words. There's a new investor group sniffing around the restaurant scene, he continued. They want to buy up promising places before they gain traction. If Maison Lutèce tanks tomorrow, Luke will be desperate. Vulnerable. They could swoop in and offer him salvation for a price. Names, Wolfe said. Domingo hesitated. The consortium uses a shell structure. The man in front is Victor Vardos. I let out a low whistle. Vardos? That guy who looks like he eats restaurant leases for breakfast? The same, Domingo said grimly. He's been circling the industry like a vulture. He likes acquiring talent. Breaking them down first isn't beneath him. Wolfe closed his eyes briefly, thinking. Vardos, a man of crude appetites and considerable reach. Too much reach, Domingo agreed. If he wanted Luke's restaurant, planting doubts would be an easy first step. Convenient, Wolfe murmured, but not conclusive. I leaned forward. Domingo, did Stenwick mention anything about being approached by Vardos? Or pressured? Or offered incentives? Domingo shook his head. No, Adrian would never accept a bribe. But pressure need not be financial, Wolfe pointed out. True, Domingo conceded. And Adrian is protective of Cora. Overly so? Wolfe asked. Domingo's sigh carried a lifetime of kitchen fatigue. Adrian keeps his heart locked up. Cora is the only person who ever had the key. If he learned about her and Luke, well, I can imagine fireworks. A puzzle piece slid into place, quietly but firmly. Wolfe opened his eyes. Archie, he said, retrieve Cora Stenwick. Now. I blinked. Right now? Yes. Immediately. Wolfe's voice sharpened. Her statement may be incomplete, and I require clarification before the matter proceeds further. Domingo looked uneasy. Is she in danger? Wolfe didn't answer directly. If this scheme hinges on her father's emotions, he said, her role may be more central than she realizes. Which was Wolfe speak for. Someone is using her, and she doesn't know it. I grabbed my coat again. Where do I find her? I asked Domingo. Her apartment, he said. West 84th. She should be home now. I was halfway to the door when Wolfe added, And Archie, return swiftly. I suspect our table is fuller than we thought. Which, translated, meant, the game has begun, and somebody is moving pieces while we're still identifying players. Outside, the snow was falling harder. Trouble was starting to layer, and I had the feeling that whatever waited at Cora's apartment, it wasn't going to be as simple as hurt feelings or missing facts. The pot was on the boil, and someone, somewhere, was stirring. The cab I grabbed on 35th was warm enough to thaw my ears without boiling my patience, which is about all I ask of public transportation. The driver barely grunted when I gave him Cora's address. That suited me fine. I wasn't in a conversational mood. Wolfe's urgency had put a pin right between my shoulder blades, and when Nero Wolfe gets urgent, the world tends to shift a little off its axis. West 84th was dusted with a fresh coat of snow, the kind that tries to look picturesque, but mostly just makes walking risky for anyone not born with crampons. Cora's building was a narrow brownstone with a stoop that needed sanding and a buzzer panel that had seen better decades. I pressed her button. Nothing. I pressed again. Longer. Still nothing. Now, I've had doors opened for me by millionaires, murderers, and the occasional romantic disappointment, so I know the sound of silence when it's the wrong kind. I checked the street. Quiet except for a dog walker bundled like a polar expedition, and a jogger, pretending it wasn't 28 degrees, no signs of lurking shadows or suspicious cars. I pressed the buzzer one more time. This time a voice crackled through. Not hers. Yeah? A man's voice, impatient. I'm here for Cora Stenwick, I said. Goodwin. She'll know me. No, she won't, the voice snapped. She's not in. When's she leave? I don't keep attendance. Try again later. The intercom clicked off. Now that was interesting. Building neighbors don't usually get territorial about each other's guests unless there's a reason. I considered buzzing another apartment, playing a little urban detective hopscotch, but I had a better tool. Feet. I stepped back and gave the building a once-over. 3 floors, lights on in 2 windows, none belonging to Cora's unit according to the buzzer list. She wasn't home, or she was ignoring me. Neither possibility tasted great. A small alley ran alongside the building, with a gate that pretended to be locked but rattled when tested. I gave it a careful nudge. It opened with a rusty complaint. I stepped in far enough to check the fire escape. Cora's unit had a kitchen window facing the alley. Locked. No signs of forced entry unless the burglar had a locksmith's finesse and a respect for clean lines. I backed out and closed the gate. Time for a change of angle. I approached the main door again, reached into my inner pocket, and pulled out a business card that looks a lot like an NYPD identification if you squint and don't know what you're looking for. I buzzed the same voice. Yeah? This is Goodwin. You want to let me in, or you want to explain to 2 uniformed officers why you interfered with a welfare check? A pause. Hold on, he muttered, and that was all I needed. The door buzzed. I went up the stairs, quick but quiet. The door to her apartment was at the end of the 2nd-floor hallway. I knocked. No answer. I put my ear against the wood. Nothing, but the doormat was crooked. Cora didn't strike me as the crooked doormat type. Some people have a spatial discipline that says everything about how their mind is arranged. Hers was crisp, controlled. Earlier, she'd held her portfolio like a shield. People like that don't leave doormats askew. I bent down. A thin envelope was tucked underneath it, and it had my name on it. That was the moment the hallway got colder. I checked both ends. Empty. Then picked up the envelope and opened it. Inside was a single sheet, typed. No signature. No letterhead. Mr. Goodwin, stop looking for her. You're already too late. Tell Wolfe the table is nearly set. When it's ready, he'll see the extra place. That was all. Clean, crisp, antiseptic. My stomach did a quiet turn. Kidnapping, threat, psychological misdirection? Hard to say. But someone had anticipated I'd come here. That meant 2 things. They were watching Cora, and they were watching Wolfe. I folded the note into my pocket and tried the apartment door. Locked. I debated forcing it, but Wolfe hates unnecessary break-ins. He says it complicates the moral ledger, and besides, I didn't have time to negotiate with deadbolts. I left the building faster than I'd entered it. 2 blocks away, I found a cab and slid in. 35th Street, I told the driver, and step lively. Someone's trying to play chess with a man who never leaves his chair. The driver made a noise that might have been assent, and we pulled into the street. I leaned back, running the exact words of the note again in my head. The table is nearly set. He'll see the extra place. Someone was enjoying themselves. Someone who liked metaphors as much as Wolfe did, but used them with a twist of malice instead of philosophy. When I walked into the office 20 minutes later, Wolfe didn't even look up. "You're early," he said again, which was his favorite complaint when he hoped for more data. "Or late," I said, tossing the envelope onto his desk. "Depends on how you measure time." He stared at the envelope, then at me. Then he opened it. As he read, his face didn't change. Not a flicker, not a shift, but the room felt smaller. Domingo rose halfway from his chair. "What is it?" Wolfe ignored him and lifted his gaze to me. "Archie," he said quietly. "Where is Miss Stenwick?" "I don't know," I said. "But somebody knows we're looking, and they wanted us to know they know." Domingo swore under his breath. Wolfe lifted the note again, examining it like a recipe he found insulting. Then he said, "Archie, call Saul Panzer," which meant one thing. The game was no longer about reputations or reviews. Someone had just made a move against a person, and Wolfe does not forgive that. I called Saul from the office phone because when you need a man who can find the flavor of a lie in a crowded room, you call Saul Panzer. He picked up on the first ring. Saul always sounds like he's been awake for 3 days and could still beat you in chess blindfolded. "Yeah, Archie." "We've got a situation," I said. "A woman's gone missing, Cora Stenwick, daughter of Adrian Stenwick, the food columnist, and somebody left me a note telling Wolfe to stop looking." "That's so?" Saul asked in a tone that meant he was already taking mental notes about city blocks, sight lines, and shoe prints. "Wolfe wants you here," I said. "I'm on my way." When I hung up, Wolfe was staring at the typed note again as though it might confess if he glared hard enough. Domingo hovered near the fireplace with all the grace of a man whose insides were boiling. "This isn't just about destroying Luke," Domingo muttered. "This is bigger." "Enlarging a matter does not clarify it," Wolfe told him sharply. "Sit." Domingo sat. Wolfe set the note on his desk like a centerpiece he disapproved of. "Archie." "Yes, sir." "Repeat your account from the moment you reached her building." Slowly. I went through it step by step, from the buzzer to the unhelpful neighbor to the crooked doormat and the waiting envelope. When I finished, Wolfe closed his eyes, fingertips together, his mind clearly cooking something no kitchen could serve. "The note writer expected you," he said. "Looks that way." "Expected you today, at this hour," Wolfe continued, "because the note was placed recently." "Right. Snow was clean on it. No drift." "Which means," Wolfe said, "Cora Stenwick has been removed recently. And deliberately." Domingo leaned forward. "Removed? You mean kidnapped?" "Possibly." Wolfe opened his eyes. "But she might have left of her own volition, tricked by someone she trusts. Regardless, the envelope implies surveillance. Someone watched you or watched her closely enough to predict our next move." "How?" Domingo asked. "How could they know she came here?" Wolfe gave him a look that suggested Domingo was asking why winter was cold. "Because someone is orchestrating a plot with multiple moving parts. Such an architect anticipates contingencies. Miss Stenwick's appeal to me may have been unexpected, but her desperation was not." I cleared my throat. "One thing puzzles me." "Only one?" Wolfe muttered. "The phrase, 'extra place at the table.'" Wolfe's eyes sharpened. "Yes, that is deliberate, a symbol, or a message." "Maybe they're mocking us," Domingo suggested weakly. "No, mockery is crude. This is ritualistic." "Ritualistic. Coming from a man who schedules meals like religious ceremonies, that was saying something. Before Wolfe could elaborate, the doorbell rang. A firm, precise ring, Saul's style. Fritz let him in and ushered him to the office. Saul Panzer entered like a gust of neutral air, unassuming, average height, average face, the kind of man who could be invisible when needed or unignorable when necessary. Today he was somewhere in between. "Gentlemen," he said. "And Mr. Velasquez." He nodded respectfully. Wolfe lifted the note. "Saul, she is missing. This was left for Archie." Saul read it once, then again, more slowly. Printed on a common home printer, no watermark, paper's standard retail, Courier New 11 point. The odd choice of font suggests someone trying to appear anonymous without being clever. "That narrows it down to half the city," I said. Saul ignored me, turning the envelope over. "No fingerprints. Someone handled this with gloves." "We need her found," Wolfe said, and there was no ambiguity left in his voice. "Begin with the building. Speak to the neighbor who answered Archie's buzz. Determine how long she's been gone and whether she left alone. Archie will accompany you." "Sure," Saul said. "What about you?" "I will think," Wolfe said, "and I will read her written statement again." Domingo stood abruptly. "I should go too." "No," Wolfe said. "You will remain. I require your familiarity with certain individuals." The tone brooked no disagreement. Domingo sat again. Saul and I left the brownstone together, stepping out into a grey snowfall that had become steadier, like the city was bracing for something. We walked a block before Saul spoke. "Whoever wrote that note," he said quietly, "isn't bluffing." I figured. "No," Saul said. "You don't understand. They're not teasing. They're laying groundwork. The table is nearly set. That means they're preparing stages. Controlled stages." "Like a course menu," I said. Saul nodded once. "Exactly." We found a cab and headed back to Cora's building. When we arrived, the same dog walker I'd passed earlier was just turning the corner. Saul's eyes flicked to him once, twice, and then dismissed him. The man's gait didn't match someone trying to tail or watch. Inside, Saul led the way to the second floor. Before we even reached Cora's door, the neighbor's head poked out of his. "Hey, what now?" he barked. Saul smiled pleasantly, which on Saul looks like a man offering you a clean handkerchief before asking where you hid the body. "Good afternoon," he said mildly. "We're following up on a safety matter. May we have a word?" The man hesitated, then opened the door wider. He was in his 50s, with a paunch that suggested allegiance to the couch and a temper that suggested frequent disputes with it. "I told the other guy. She ain't home," he said. "What other guy?" I asked. He shrugged. "The one who was here 10 minutes before you. Tall fella. Dark coat. Asked if I'd seen her leave. I said no. He left." Saul and I exchanged a glance. Cora's watcher had beaten us to the building. "Did he say who he was?" Saul asked. "No, didn't ask either. Had a vibe, you know? Like someone with a purpose." "Did he go inside her apartment?" "No, just asked and left." Saul nodded. "Thank you." We stepped away, but Saul paused halfway down the hall. "Archie," he said, "give me the envelope again." I handed it over. He held it near the doorframe of Cora's apartment and tilted it. Something faint, so faint I'd missed it, glimmered under the peephole. A tiny smear, beige, almost invisible. Saul touched it with his finger, then rubbed it lightly. "Makeup," he said. "Foundation." Someone leaned in and listened at her door. "So they were here before the note was placed," I said. "Right," Saul replied. "Which means they knew she wasn't inside." The hallway suddenly felt colder. "So where the hell is she?" I muttered. Saul looked at me, his face tightening. "That depends on one question," he said. "Is she the extra place at the table, or the main course?" And for the first time since Wolfe took the case, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. Saul didn't waste time standing around philosophizing about entree versus garnish. He was already moving down the stairs before the last word left his mouth. I followed, because trailing Saul is like trailing a well-trained bloodhound. He won't wait for you to tie your shoes. Outside, the snow had thickened into a curtain. The streetlights were flickering on early, the city's way of admitting defeat to winter. Saul stopped at the corner and scanned both sides of the block with his usual calm, methodical eye. "Whoever leaned on that peephole," he said, "wanted to confirm she wasn't inside. The timing tells us something." "Yeah," I agreed. "They knew we'd come looking for her. Maybe planned it so we'd find the note and run back to Wolfe." "No," Saul said. "Not maybe. Definitely. This is choreography. And Cora's not dancing voluntarily." Saul didn't answer. He was staring at the sidewalk where the snow had been disturbed in overlapping patterns of footprints and tire tracks. To me it looked like abstract art, but to Saul it probably read like a paperback. "Look here," he said, crouching down. "Two sets of prints stop at the curb. One small, woman's shoe. One larger. They wait, then both turn and go to the passenger side of a car. And then disappear," I said. Saul stood. "Car drove off with her inside." "You're sure the smaller prints are hers?" "No," Saul said, "but they fit the odds. And the rhythm. The smaller prints are lighter, someone standing hesitant. The larger ones are planted firm, someone standing close. Too close." I didn't need Saul to translate that one. Someone stood over Cora and guided, nudged, threatened, or forced her into a car. "Could be a friend escorting her," I offered. Saul gave me a look that suggested I save optimism for birthday parties. "Let's get back to Wolfe before he plans a solo offensive," he said. We caught another cab. Saul never fidgets, never looks impatient, but there was a tightness in the line of his jaw that told me he was calculating probabilities, and none were good. When we stepped into the office, Wolfe was still in his chair, but now his bulk leaned forward just slightly, elbows on the armrests, fingers together. For Wolfe, that posture is the equivalent of a man pacing holes in the carpet. Domingo had not moved from his seat. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last 30 minutes. "Well?" Wolfe demanded. Saul gave the report cleanly, without embellishment. When he finished with the part about the two sets of footprints and the car, Wolfe's nostrils flared. "This is intolerable," he said. Not angry, furious. Wolfe doesn't shout when he's furious. He compresses. Domingo shot to his feet. "We have to call the police." "No," Wolfe snapped. "Not yet. We lack clarity." His eyes turned to me. "Archie, retrieve Miss Stenwick's written statement." I did. Wolfe opened the envelope and spread her pages across his blotter, as delicately as if he were laying out botanical specimens. He reread silently, lips moving faintly. Then he tapped the second page. "Here," he said. "Her account of the breakup. She asserts it ended amicably. Mutually. That is too neat. Archie, do you believe her? About the amicable part?" "Sure, about the mutual part." "Not entirely." Domingo frowned. "What are you suggesting?" "That someone's ego was bruised," Wolfe said. "Perhaps Luke's, perhaps Cora's, perhaps Stenwick's, or perhaps all three. Ego wounds leave trails." "But how does that lead to her disappearance?" Domingo asked, voice cracking. Wolfe drummed his fingers once. Rare, ominous. "Because someone intends her disappearance to mean something." "The extra place at the table. Archie, hand me the anonymous letter again." I did. Wolfe held it up, examining each line like it contained tiny poisons. Victor Vardos, Wolfe said slowly. He manipulates the industry like a puppeteer, chef reputations, critic alliances, investment plays. All ingredients he stirs. You think he took her? Domingo whispered. No, not personally. He does not sully his own hands, but he has associates. And if he sees Stenwick's integrity as an obstacle to controlling the culinary landscape, removing Stenwick's daughter from the equation would push Stenwick over the edge. I finished. He'd publish that hit piece without a second thought. Yes, Wolfe said grimly, if he believed Morel harmed her. Domingo's face drained of color. But Luke didn't. That is immaterial until proven. Wolfe cut in. What matters is that someone intends Stenwick to think Luke did. The room went still. Because that fit. Too well. Sabotage Luke, frame Luke, enrage Stenwick, publish destructive review, ruin Luke, force sale to Vardos. And Cora, collateral or leverage. Or both. Wolfe closed his eyes. Archie. Yes, sir. You will go to Adrian Stenwick. Now, take Saul. Tell him nothing of Cora's disappearance unless unavoidable. Gauge his temperament. Determine whether he has already been agitated by outside influence. And if he has, then proceed with extreme caution. A father's rage is a blunt instrument. I need precision. Domingo stepped forward. What about Cora? What if she's hurt? Wolfe turned his head toward him with a weight that pinned the air. Mr. Velasquez, he said, Nero Wolfe does not abandon a client. We will find her, but understanding the mind of Adrian Stenwick is the first essential task, because someone is feeding him poison, and he is swallowing it. Saul moved toward the door. I grabbed my coat. Just as I stepped out, Wolfe called after us. And Archie, observe everything. A man stripped of rational balance is dangerous, but the man who tipped him is deadlier still. Outside, the snow had turned heavy and wet. If Stenwick was a puppet on someone's string, I intended to find out who was pulling it, and whether the string had already tightened around his daughter. Saul and I made it to the Gazette building in record time for a snowy evening, meaning the cab only got stuck behind 2 double-parked delivery vans and 1 pedestrian who believed crosswalk signals were a suggestion. The newsroom lobby was warm, bright, and buzzing with the kind of deadline tension that makes editors snap pencils in half, just to feel alive. The receptionist looked up as we approached. She knew me. Wolfe and the Gazette have a long, complicated relationship that mostly runs through Lon Cohen's ability to stomach us. Hi, Archie. You here for Lon? Not this time, I said. We need Adrian Stenwick. Her eyebrows did a little hop. He's in his office, working on tomorrow's column. That was exactly what concerned me. She waved us through, past the rows of desks, journalists hunched over keyboards, and screens showing more charts, pictures, and outrage than a normal brain should absorb in one sitting. Stenwick's office was at the far end, door slightly ajar, the soft glow of his desk lamp spilling into the hall. Saul motioned for silence and stepped ahead. I followed. Stenwick was sitting at his desk, shoulders rigid, eyes locked on the monitor. His fingers hovered over the keyboard but weren't moving. The room smelled faintly of stale coffee and stress. 2 newsroom staples. On the desk beside him lay a stack of printed drafts, red pen edits slashed across the page like surgical incisions. He didn't notice us until Saul knocked gently on the doorframe. Adrian Stenwick jerked slightly and turned in his chair. His face was pale, pinched tight around the mouth, and his eyes were exhausted in a way that didn't come from staying up late editing adjectives. This was the exhaustion of a man who'd been convinced, carefully, deliberately, that the walls were closing in. What? He snapped. Then, seeing me. Goodwin, what do you want? Just a word, I said, keeping my tone easy. Nothing dramatic. May we come in? His gaze flicked to Saul, who could pass for a tax accountant on a good day. Adrian waved a hand. Fine. Briefly, I'm on deadline. We stepped inside. Saul closed the door behind us, not abruptly, but firmly enough to be noticed. Stenwick narrowed his eyes. "What is this? Some intervention arranged by Cora?" "That depends," I said lightly, "on how much you've been told lately." His expression iced over. "Meaning?" "Meaning everything, but I wasn't about to show the whole deck." "We heard you received an anonymous letter about Maison Lute's," I said, "and that you investigated." "I did. Thoroughly." His voice sharpened. "And I found deception, dishonesty, professional fraud. I will not be cowed out of reporting it just because it may hurt feelings." "No one said feelings," I told him. "We're talking about facts." "I know facts," he snapped. "I've built a career on them." I nodded at the scattered drafts. "Those facts?" His jaw tightened. "My writing is my concern." "Your daughter is also your concern," I countered, and watched the impact hit him like a hammer to the sternum. A father who has no idea his daughter is missing reacts one way. A father who's already worried reacts another. Stenwick's fingers curled on the arm of his chair. "Did she send you?" "I told her I don't need her meddling in my profession." "When was the last time you spoke to her?" I asked. "Yesterday," he said automatically. Or, "No, this morning. She called, briefly. She said she was sorting something out, that she'd see me tonight." His breaths grew shallow. "Why? Has something happened?" Saul stepped closer, calm as a surgeon. "Mr. Stenwick," he said softly, "we need you to think carefully. Did she sound distressed, uncertain, frightened?" He swallowed. "She was abrupt. That happens. She worries. But no, she didn't sound frightened." He looked up sharply. "Why are you asking? What are you implying?" "We're asking," I said, "because she's not at home, and someone left a note addressed to me saying we're too late." His face drained of color so fast I thought he might faint. "What?" His voice cracked. "What do you mean, too late? Too late for what? Where is she?" "We don't know yet," I said. "We're trying to find out." No, this is..." He stood abruptly, knocking a stack of papers off his desk. "You're lying. You're manipulating me. This is a ploy to get me to soften the column. I won't do it. I won't..." "This isn't about the column," I said sharply. "This is about your daughter." He froze. Saul moved a step closer, quiet and steady. "Mr. Stenwick, someone is using you, and they're using Cora to do it." Stenwick's eyes flicked between us, wild and unfocused. I'd seen men in shock before. It's like their mind is sprinting while their body is stuck in molasses. "Sit down," Saul said. "I don't need..." "Sit," Saul repeated, with enough gentle firmness that even a critic recognized authority. Stenwick dropped into his chair, trembling. I gave him a moment before continuing. "We think someone wants you to publish that column. Not because it's true, but because it serves their purpose." "What purpose?" His voice shook. "Why would anyone care what I write about that restaurant?" "Because," Saul said, "if Luc Morel is publicly ruined, certain people in the investment world stand to benefit, a consortium led by Victor Vardos." Stenwick let out a strangled laugh. "Vardos? That parasite? He's been trying to recruit Cora for months, corporate culinary consulting or some vapid nonsense. She refused him, told him she preferred integrity over profit." I exchanged a look with Saul. That was new. "Did Vardos know about your column?" I asked. "Yes," Stenwick said bitterly. "He asked to preview it. I declined. He didn't like that." "And how did he react?" "How do you think? He threatened to reshape the conversation without me." Stenwick looked up sharply. "Are you suggesting he's involved in this? That he..." He broke off, horror widening his eyes. This time he did look faint. Saul steadied him with a hand on his shoulder. "We don't know yet." "But we will," I said. Stenwick swallowed hard. "I want to see the draft." "You have it in front of you," I said. No, the original. He pointed shakily to the pile. It's been edited. By me. I need to see what I first wrote. He reached into the drawer, rummaging through notebooks until he withdrew a voice recorder. My assistant transcribes from this, he said. My raw dictation. If someone tampered with the draft, they'd have needed access to this. He pressed play. Silence. He frowned and pressed again. Silence. Saul and I exchanged a look. Stenwick's hand shook as he lifted the recorder, turning it over. Then he saw the faint indentation, tiny, almost imperceptible, near the screw. A pry mark. His voice broke. Someone opened it. Saul nodded grimly. Swapped the memory card. Stenwick dropped into his chair like the world had hit him full force. So the column, the words, they might not even be mine. That's the idea, I said gently. You're being used. Saul put a hand on the desk. Mr. Stenwick, think carefully. When did you last see Cora? Where was she going? She said. He closed his eyes. She said she was going to speak with someone who could help. Someone who understood the stakes. Someone who could set the table right. I assumed she meant Domingo. My stomach sank, because that line wasn't Cora's. It belonged to someone else. The anonymous note. Saul's breath tightened. Archie. I know, I said. She was fed a phrase to lead her somewhere. Stenwick's eyes darted between us, terrified. Where did she go? We don't know, I said. But we're going to find out. Saul touched my arm. We need to get back to Wolfe, now. Stenwick stood abruptly. I'm coming with you. No, Saul said. You're staying here. You're safer in a crowded newsroom. And, I added, if the saboteur wants you emotional and reactive, the last thing we need is you storming into Wolfe's office like a tornado. He started to protest, but the recorder in his hand seemed to drain the fight out of him. Saul opened the door. Mr. Stenwick, he said, lock this room. Don't talk to anyone. We'll contact you. Then we left him trembling behind a closed door. As we made our way to the elevator, I murmured, he didn't sound surprised that Cora might be in danger. No, Saul said, because someone primed him. Primed him how? By convincing him Luke Morrell is dangerous. And the final push, I said slowly, would be an accusation. Saul nodded. A staged threat, a staged disappearance. The elevator doors slid open. And now, Saul said, Wolfe needs to hear that the person who manipulated Stenwick's words may also be manipulating his world. Snow drifted into the lobby from the revolving door. The city was getting colder, and the table, whatever table Wolfe was being dared to sit at, was almost ready. By the time we reached the brownstone again, the snowfall had gone from gentle curtain to thick velvet drape. The city blurred at the edges, as if New York itself didn't want to witness whatever was unfolding. Saul paid the cab while I moved ahead, my pulse ticking a steady beat of annoyance and dread. I don't mind a mystery, but I do mind when the pieces rearrange themselves under my feet. Inside, Fritz hovered near the hall like an anxious guardian angel with impeccable posture. When he saw us, he gave one sharp nod and vanished toward the kitchen, his version of bracing for impact. Wolfe's voice floated from the office. Come. We entered. Wolfe was where we'd left him, tilted forward in his chair, a position he normally reserves for conversations about truffles or treachery. Domingo was still seated near the fireplace, hands clasped, eyes stormy. Well? Wolfe demanded. I didn't bother easing into it. Stenwick's recorder was tampered with. Someone swapped the memory card. The draft he's editing isn't his work. Domingo swore softly. Wolfe merely shut his eyes for a beat, absorbing the information like a sponge soaks up spilled ink. Continue, Wolfe said. We found signs Cora left the apartment with someone. Footprints to a waiting car. The person who took her leaned on her peephole, wearing makeup. They planted the note after she was gone, and a man came to the building before us asking whether she'd been seen. Wolfe's nostrils flared. Describe him. The neighbor only said tall, dark coat. No further details. Saul stepped closer to Wolfe's desk, placing his hands in his pockets. And Stenwick's been primed, manipulated. Someone convinced him Morel is dangerous. If he gets word Cora is missing, he'll assume Luke did it. And publish the column in a frenzy. Wolfe finished, locking in Luke's ruin and clearing the way for Vardos. Domingo leaned forward. But why take Cora? Why involve her at all? Because, Wolfe said, voice dropping to a chilled murmur. She is the lever that moves her father. The orchestrator has exploited her trust, her affection for Luke, and her father's belief that she is fragile. They dangled lines before each party and waited for the tangle. Saul nodded. They didn't need to harm her. They only needed to remove her from the board and imply danger. The weight in the room deepened. I glanced at the note on Wolfe's desk, its message seeming to darken like a storm cloud. Tell Wolfe the table is nearly set. And the last seat? I asked quietly. Who's it for? Wolfe opened his eyes. That, Archie, is the crux. Someone wishes me to observe, or participate, or react. They are performing a ritual of psychological theater, and Cora is their centerpiece. My jaw tightened. She's not dead. No, Wolfe said with certainty. If she were, the message would be different, cruder. This is refinement. Our adversary enjoys suspense. Saul spoke next. We need to find out who had access to Stenwick's recorder. I shook my head. His assistant? Possibly. But the tampering required timing and confidence and access to the newsroom or his home office or both. Or, Wolfe said softly, Luke Morel. Domingo shot out of his seat. Impossible. Luke would never— I am not accusing him, Wolfe said tersely. I'm enumerating possibilities. Calm yourself. He wouldn't hurt Cora, Domingo insisted, voice cracking. Not even indirectly. Wolfe tilted his head. Love can be a motive, Mr. Velasquez. So can rejection. Domingo subsided, but his expression was tortured. Saul paced slowly, hands clasped behind him. We need more data. Yes, Wolfe said. We do. He shifted his gaze to me. Archie, fetch the statement again. I did. Wolfe scanned the lines, tapping one finger on the section describing her breakup. Something bothered him. Her description, Wolfe murmured. Her rationale, the tidiness of it. Archie, read aloud the portion regarding their final conversation. I read it. Wolfe frowned. There. He said he understood. He was calm, polite, and he wished me well. Sounds reasonable to me, I said. Too reasonable, too curated. A precise phrasing of closure. People do not speak so neatly at the end of affairs. Domingo looked between us helplessly. You think she lied? I asked. No. I think she repeated what she wished to believe, and someone exploited that optimism. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Even if Luke did not orchestrate this, someone close to him may have. A sous chef, a former colleague, a rival. Someone with access to the kitchen, the staff, and perhaps Cora. Saul nodded. Marco, the waiter she mentioned. Indeed, Wolfe agreed, and his absence today is conspicuous. I straightened. You want me to visit Marco? No, Wolfe said. We cannot assume the saboteur is that careless. We need him located discreetly. Saul will handle that. Saul nodded once. I exhaled. Then what's my next move? Wolfe regarded me with a sharpness that meant gears had clicked into place. You, Archie, will go to Maison Lutèce again. This evening? At once. Before dinner service fully commences. You will speak not to Luke, but to his staff. Quietly, casually. Mention Cora, lightly, and note reactions. And Luke? Do not mention her disappearance. Not yet. Domingo sprang up again. No. If Luke does not know, if he learns from the wrong person, he must not learn at all, Wolfe said firmly. Not until we determine whether he is victim or instrument. His emotions would be disruptive. Domingo sat heavily. Saul stepped toward the door. I'll head for Marco's last known address. Wolfe gave a curt nod. Proceed. Saul left without another word. I put on my coat again for the third time that night. Wolfe called after me, voice low but lethal. Archie, the adversary is watching. They have anticipated our steps thus far. Break their rhythm. Be unpredictable. I turned back. Any specific suggestion? Yes, Wolfe said. Do not take a cab. It wasn't often he made tactical recommendations beyond telling me not to get shot. I stepped into the cold again. The snow was heavier now, muffling the city, swallowing sound. Someone out there had set a table. And if Wolfe was right, they were waiting for me to take my seat. I didn't take a cab because Wolfe had said don't, and when Wolfe gives a directive in that tone, the universe tends to enforce it even if you don't. I cut east through the snow, keeping to storefronts and recessed doorways, doubling back twice the way Saul taught me. No tails, no watchers, just the wet whish of tires and the smell of steam grates that always reminds me of hot metal and bad decisions. When I reached Maison Lutece, the dinner crowd hadn't swelled yet. Staff bustled inside like bees in a hive someone had shaken once. The air was taut, too taut. Luc Morel spotted me instantly. Cooks remember everyone who walks into their kitchen twice in a day. He hurried over, wiping his hands on a towel. Goodwin. What now? Relax, I said. Not here to cause trouble. Just taking the pulse of the place. He glanced over my shoulder. Anything from Cora? My pulse flicked, but Wolfe's orders echoed. Do not tell him. Not yet. Nothing urgent, I said lightly. Just checking a few points. Luke didn't buy it. His jaw tightened. Archie, if something has happened. Before he could finish, one of his staff passed by, a slim, sharp-eyed woman with her hair tucked under a bandana. She glanced at us, then at Luke, then scurried off too quickly. Nervous. I logged it. Then another one, a busboy, halted mid-step when he saw me and pretended to be fascinated by a stack of plates. Too fascinated. Marco, the missing waiter, wasn't present. No surprise there. Luke followed my gaze. Why are you looking at my staff like that? Because they're looking at me like that, I said. Luke's eyes narrowed. Archie, what do you know? Luke, calm down. No. His voice dropped low, accented, dangerous. Tell me. But before I could answer, or lie again, a familiar voice spoke behind us. I believe it is time, Nero Wolfe said, for everyone to stop posturing. I turned. There he was. Nero Wolfe, wrapped in his heaviest coat, leaning on his cane as if he had personally declared war on the weather. Fritz stood behind him, pale as parchment, and beside them, escorted between two uniformed officers, was Marco. Luke's face drained. Monsieur Wolfe, why are you... Be quiet, Wolfe said calmly. I detest the cold, and I loathe theatrics. I would not step beyond my threshold unless the situation demanded a more personal demonstration. Luke swallowed. What demonstration? That you, Wolfe said, have been profoundly deceived, as has Miss Stenwick, as has Adrian Stenwick. He turned to Marco. And you, sir, have been used. Marco looked up, trembling. I didn't, Mr. Wolfe, I didn't... No, Wolfe said. You did nothing, which is both your innocence and the lever by which the guilty moved you. Luke shook his head. What are you saying? I stepped in. Luke, somebody impersonated Marco when speaking to Adrian Stenwick. Same height, same build, same uniform, same mannerisms. Wolfe nodded. A perfect imitation, by someone who knew Marco well enough to mimic him. Someone with access to the restaurant. Someone with access to Cora, to Stenwick's office, to the anonymous letter, and to Vardos's consortium. Luke blinked in disbelief. Victor Vardos? No, Wolfe cut in. Vardos is a blunt instrument. He finances corruption. He does not craft it. He pays others to think. He turned, slowly, his gaze resting on Domingo Velasquez, who had followed Wolfe inside and now stood pale and stunned. Domingo whispered, "Wolfe, no, not me." "Not you," Wolfe agreed, "but someone who worked in your kitchen, someone ambitious, someone resentful, someone who felt Luke betrayed him by succeeding." Luke drew in a sharp breath. "No, not—" "Yes," Wolfe said. "Your sous chef, Henri." A gasp traveled through the kitchen like a dropped tray. Wolfe continued, tone clinical. "Henri coveted your restaurant, envied your rise, and despised that you had once dated Cora Stenwick. He saw in that vulnerability a means to break you. He impersonated Marco to Stenwick. He crafted the anonymous letter with insider details from years in Domingo's kitchen. He doctored Stenwick's recorder during a staged visit to the paper, and he lured Miss Stenwick to a meeting by feeding her the phrase, 'Set the table right.'" Luke choked. "Henri? My friend?" "Your rival," Wolfe corrected. "Vardos merely dangled opportunity. Henri provided the plan." Domingo's voice cracked. "Where is Cora? Is she—" "She is alive," Wolfe said firmly, "and shaken, but unharmed." He looked at me. "Archie?" Right on cue, Sol Panzer appeared at the back door of the restaurant, coat dusted with snow, face calm, and beside him, Cora Stenwick. She looked pale, shaken, but conscious. When she saw Luke, she moved to him with a mixture of relief and confusion. "Henry, he said he needed to show me something about you." Luke pulled her into his arms. "Cora, mon Dieu, I thought—" Wolfe cleared his throat loudly. "Enough. Romance later. Justice now." Two officers pushed forward with a man between them, a gaunt figure with sharp cheekbones and eyes burning with thwarted ambition. "Henri," he snarled the moment he saw Luke. "You stole what should have been mine. Domingo's spotlight, the investors, the acclaim. You think talent wins. It is influence, leverage. I was making a place for myself." Wolfe fixed him with icy disdain. "You were setting a table of destruction, but you made one fatal miscalculation." Henri glared. "Which?" "You assumed," Wolfe said, "that I would remain seated." For once, Henri had no answer. Saul handed Wolfe a small slip of paper, the recovered memory card from Stenwick's recorder. Wolfe placed it on a nearby table, the symbolic closing of a case. "Inspector," he said to the nearest officer, "you may proceed." They took Henri out, with enough force to satisfy the dignity of the law and my personal sense of poetic justice. Luke and Cora clung to each other like two people pulled back from the edge of a cliff. Domingo looked 10 years older and 10 pounds lighter. And Wolfe, he was shivering. "Archie," he said, voice trembling with disdain, "get me home before I die of contempt for this climate." Back at the brownstone, after Fritz had recovered from the shock of Wolfe venturing outdoors and had fortified him with brandy and warmth, Wolfe settled into his chair with a heavy sigh. Cora and Luke visited long enough to offer thanks. Stenwick called to do the same, voice cracking in a way he'd deny under oath. When the front door finally closed and the house was quiet again, Wolfe let out a low rumble. "Foolishness," he muttered. "Treacherous ambition, romantic folly, culinary politics, phooey." I grinned. "You solved it." "I corrected it," he said. "Solving is a hobby, correcting is a duty." "So what's the moral this time?" I asked. "Ambition is bad for digestion. Sous chefs should stay in their lane." Wolfe shut his eyes. The moral, they said, is that a table, properly set, admits no deceit. Every place has its purpose. Add one too many, and the balance collapses. Not bad, I said. You want that embroidered on a pillow? He opened one eye. Archie, shut up. Fritz appeared in the doorway. Dinner is served, sir. Wolfe rose, slowly, achingly, and followed the scent toward salvation. Balance restored. Case closed. And me? I went along, because with Wolfe, even dinner can be a victory lap. It 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 can be a